So I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar, whether you're listening live or watching later. And the point of this webinar is to talk about stress and fear and anxiety and overwhelm, which really all go in the same bucket, and to give some really practical, useful information on how to manage stress, overwhelm, anxiety, etc. And I'm going to do a mixture of theory and practice, as I always do, because we need both theory and practice. And at the end, I'm going to be sharing where you can get more resources if you want to learn more. And some of those resources will be free and some of them will be paid. So to start with, what I would like to do is to do a guided breathing exercise, which you can use at any time to help reduce stress and anxiety. And so before starting this exercise, what I recommend you do is you just feel into where you're at right now in your body and just be sitting. I recommend that you sit still for this. Don't be doing anything else. Be sitting. You could be lying also if needs be. But don't be standing, don't be walking around, don't be doing something else. Because what we have to do is we have to bring our attention inwards. And in our world, we spend most of our time putting our attention outwards. And that is actually very draining in many ways, which I'm not going to go into today. But we need to actually bring our attention inwards. So I invite you to close your eyes and bring your attention inwards and take 3 long, deep breaths from your abdomen. So when I say breathe from your abdomen, what I mean is you breathe in your abdomen as if you were blowing a balloon or a basketball up inside your abdomen. And that basketball is going to expand forwards, sideways, and backwards at the same time. So your abdomen expands out as you breathe in. And then on the exhale, you just relax and allow the shoulders to drop. Because we don't often realize how much we're holding our shoulders up by our ears until we actually bring our attention there. And actually, one thing that I meant to do before we started doing the breathing exercises, I'd like you to tune in and notice if you had to put your stress level from 1 to 10 and 1 was low and 10 was very high, what would you rate it right now? So just intuitively see, what is the rating for my stress or anxiety or whatever word you want to put on your unease. And so you've done the rating, so just let that go. And then again, bring your attention back to your abdomen, back to your breathing. And put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, because this closes a very important energy circuit in the body, which actually was the first energy circuit created when we were in the womb as a fetus. And it helps us maintain our energy. So you can put your tongue on the roof of your mouth and try and keep it there. And if you forget and you notice, then put it back there. After a while, it will become automatic. But anyway, you're breathing in your abdomen. And as you breathe in, you're going to breathe up your spine and into your shoulder blades, all in one breath. And then on the exhale, you just let everything go. As you breathe in, you expand your belly and you take that breath up your spine into the shoulder blades, into the shoulders. And then on the exhale, you just relax, drop the shoulders, let everything go. And keep your focus of attention in your belly. And if you want to have a point of focus, then make it your navel or just behind your navel. Because most of the time, and especially when we get anxious, we will have our attention in our head because we'll be thinking. And I'm going to be talking why that is later. But for now, bring your attention to the center of your belly or your navel and keep it there as you're breathing. So you're still continuing the breathing by yourself, breathing the abdomen out as you breathe in, expanding the abdomen, and then just relaxing everything on the exhale, but your attention is in the abdomen. And just from doing this, just from doing a minute of breathing, I'd like you to re-rate how you're feeling inside and just see if there's any change. No expectation, no judgment, just noticing. And then we're going to move into what's called balanced breathing. And balanced breathing balances the autonomic nervous system, which is the regulator of the branches of the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic nervous system response and the parasympathetic nervous system response. And the parasympathetic is regeneration, digestion, healing, and the sympathetic is stress, fear, fight, flight, freeze. And when we do balanced breathing, we balance the autonomic nervous system, and it helps to recalibrate and rebalance the autonomic nervous system. And the effects, the end result of that is that we feel calmer. And balanced breathing is very easy. You simply breathe in to the count of 6, and the count is like about a second long. And then you exhale to the count of 6, and you don't hold on either end. So breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just continue that breathing rhythm by yourself, and remember it's really important to be breathing from your abdomen and taking that breath up the spine into the shoulders. And just do it naturally, don't force anything. If you're finding that that's too many, then bring it down to 4, for example. Don't try and force anything. But just notice, how does it feel when I breathe like this? So I'm just going to be silent for half a minute and allow you to continue breathing like that by yourself. 6 counts in and 6 counts out. All your focus is in your torso. Your focus is not in your head at all. Your tongue is on the roof of your mouth. If possible, mouth closed, breathing through the nose. And then I'd like you to extend the out breath by 2 counts. So if you're doing 6 counts in, then extend the out breath to 8. And I'll explain why this is in a minute. So you're breathing in for 6 and exhaling slightly longer. And the reason we do this is that when we breathe in, we stimulate the sympathetic nervous system response more, and when we breathe out, we turn on the parasympathetic relaxation response more. So if we're super stressed, we might want to do a slightly longer exhale than inhale. So then I'd like you to tune in again and do that rating from 1 to 10 and see what changes you may have noticed. See if there are any changes physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically. And the thing about breathing is that it's a part of our autonomic nervous system that we have control over, because we don't have control over many parts of our autonomic nervous system because it's meant to be automatic. But breathing we do have control over, and we're meant to have control over our breathing so that we can control ourselves. So we can, when I say control ourselves, what I mean is so we can control our mental, emotional state, which then controls our physical state, because that's the order it goes in. It's not the physical state controlling the mental and emotional state, although actually sometimes, you know, for example, through posture, that could be true. But primarily our mental and emotional state dictates our physical state. So if we don't take control over our mind, our thoughts, our emotions, we're not going to have control over our stress. And the great news is we can take control. We can have complete control over how we respond, but it takes learning, and it takes application, and it takes repeating it and practicing it and understanding the theory and the practice. But when we do that, then we have control. And I'm all about giving people control over their health, and as the saying goes, you know, teaching a man to fish or a woman to fish. That's what excites me. Because, you know, if we don't have access to other resources, medication, supplements, therapists, we need to be able to rely on ourselves. So that's just you can open your eyes now, and that was just an introductory, an introductory breathing technique, which you can use anytime to manage how you're feeling mentally, emotionally, physically, and to change your state. And it couldn't be simpler. It's completely free. And the only thing is, like with all these self-help techniques, is that you have to do it for it to work. It's one thing learning it, but if you never actually put it into practice, nothing is going to happen. So you can try that. And if I was to give a prescription, so to speak, for using this technique, if say you were going through a period of anxiety and stress, I would be saying, do it on the hour. Do it on the hour. You know, your phone goes off once an hour, and you just do it for 2 minutes. And if it's maybe a little less stress, then maybe do it 2 or 3 times a day. And if you're not stressed at all, then maybe just do it once a day. But do it. So now that we've done the exercise, and hopefully you're a little more present, a little more relaxed, I'm just going to go over the rough agenda for today. And I'm going to introduce myself very briefly, say who I am, and also share a little bit about my journey to de-stressing, and so how I've learned all these techniques, and how I really feel like I have a reasonable amount of understanding and theory and knowledge and practice of how to de-stress and how to deal with anxiety and all that sort of stuff. And then we're going to go more into a little bit of theory around fear, stress, shock, because when we understand the theory, it helps us to make sense of things and have less fear. And and then also along the way, there's a couple more exercises that I'll be sharing, very, very simple exercises, one probably in the middle of the webinar and one at the end. So to start with, who am I? So very briefly, I've been working, because I know some of you know me, some of you don't. I've been working as a health and personal development coach for 15 years. And that came off the back of my own journey of previous probably 15 years, 20 years, I don't know, of getting myself well from clinical depression, chronic fatigue, anxiety, chronic back pain, and all sorts of health conditions, which led me on a very, very long journey to find the answers, because everything I tried, nothing I tried seemed to work. The medical system certainly was unable to help me, and that's not putting the medical system down in any way. It's just that they're more better for acute things, surgery, emergencies, that sort of thing. But long-term chronic illness, you know, not so helpful. And I tried hundreds of therapies. I was unable to work for 10 years. And so I went on a very, very deep and long exploration, which has continued even after I got better. So I could say I was healed, or I'd healed myself from chronic fatigue back in 2006. And at that point, I'd trained in so many therapies to try and get myself well that I was actually a therapist, which wasn't intended. And so I started working with other people because I'd trained in all these therapies. So then there's another 15 years of clinical practice working with hundreds of people, and all the while continuing my own training and my own work on myself. Because one of the things that I discovered on my journey to get well was that it's actually a lot quicker to heal physical symptoms of illness than it is to de-stress, to really fundamentally de-stress. And one day, after I could say I was about 95% better, I didn't have symptoms of chronic fatigue anymore. You know, I mean, I was starting to live a normal life. I was starting to work. But I was sitting on my porch one day asking myself, why is it that even though I keep saying I want to be relaxed and I want to just sit down and read a book and be relaxed and take some time out, why is it that I can't do that without feeling jittery and nervous and jumpy? And I just don't seem to be able to turn this stress response off. And a light bulb sort of moment came to me as I sat there thinking about this. And I realized that deep down, it didn't feel safe for me to not be stressed. And that actually, in a way, I was addicted to stress. In other words, I had a stress habit. And then I asked myself, well, why is that? Why is it that even though I say I don't want to be stressed, I am stressed, and I don't seem to be able to stop being stressed, and I can just feel this vibration, you know, inside of me, vibrating, a vibration of fear and stress. Why is it? And then I realized, wow, well, when I was a kid, I didn't feel very safe in my home environment. And, you know, physically, not so bad. Physically, yes, I would get hit, and so there would be fear from that, but mainly sort of emotionally, it wasn't an emotionally comfortable environment. And so I didn't feel safe, so I could never actually relax. And I was always waiting for the next shoe to drop, as the saying goes. I was always waiting to be told off, maybe to be hit, whatever. I was just waiting for that next thing to happen. And that can happen in many different ways for us. You know, you just think back to your childhood. What were you waiting, you know, to happen? And when that happens as a child, if we don't have resources and we don't have support, our only resource is to stay stressed, to stay in that stress response, because that is our safety response. It's our way of dealing with danger, whether that threat is real or perceived. And so unconsciously, I trained myself to be stressed all the time, but I never knew it. And then what I noticed as I was working, because that was right at the beginning of me working in the clinic, I started to notice that it was exactly the same thing for every single client. And when I say every single client, I mean no exceptions, not one. And I started to see the pattern between chronic stress set up as a child, chronic emotional suppression set up as a child, and then chronic illness as an adult, and chronic stress as an adult. And so I became aware as I was sitting on the porch of, wow, I'm really stressed. I'm a stress bunny. And actually, everybody else must see it, but it's the first time that I've seen it. And I suddenly started to see all the signs of, you know, how one behaves when, and how one thinks, and how one feels when one is stressed. And I made a commitment on that day that I was going to do whatever it took to reduce stress and to somehow eliminate stress. And I just made an absolute commitment. And I started to notice every little thing that turned the stress response on or made it worse inside my body, because it was already on. But I started to notice what exacerbated stress and what triggered stress, and became very, very mindful of every response going on inside my body, and started making changes. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that now, because that is actually the content of my De-Stress Your Life program, which is a very, very comprehensive program on how to de-stress, because we have to take into account emotions, our lifestyle, our habits, our mental habits of thinking, that there are so many things that we have to really, really deal with if we want to fundamentally, comprehensively, over a period of time, eliminate stress. But the point is I did that, and it took me about 3 years of doing that on a daily basis to finally feel a really significant shift. Now, fortunately, when I teach people now, it doesn't take them 3 years, although, well, it doesn't take them 3 years to learn what they need to learn, but it still needs, you know, application time over a period of time. And one of the things that I also discovered was that if you think of a geological diagram like you might have had when you were doing geography at school, it's always what comes to mind for me, and you have like the layers of the ground, you know, so you might have pebbles, and then you have sand, and then you'd have big pebbles and maybe some rock underneath, and you have these layers. Well, the thing with fear is that it's like that in the body. We have layers of fear, and they're built up on top of each other. But the good news is we'll only ever be given by our very wise body what we're ready to deal with. So we, you know, whatever it is that we need to deal with on a fear basis, we'll only be given what we're ready to deal with. But one has to sort of move through the layers of fear, if you like, to really fundamentally de-stress. And anyways, that was a 3-year journey, and then continuing on afterwards, and learning more and more about stress and de-stressing. And one of the things that I then learned, which was in 2009, so this was 3 years after that, was that actually, well, I'd already recognized that I was addicted to stress, and I literally called it a habit, like cocaine, cigarettes, you know, coffee, whatever. That is what it is like for most people. They are in a stress habit, and it's so the norm that they don't even know it's not normal. And unfortunately, that's because our society as a whole is just used to being stressed. It's the norm. But in 2009, I had another light bulb moment when I was on my annual Qigong training. And I learned that our natural state, in other words, the state that we should naturally be in on a daily basis, unless, and even actually sometimes when, there is a real threat to life, we should be in a state of complete calm and relaxation and peace and joy. So I'd just like you to ponder on those words for a moment, if this is the first time you're hearing this concept. And just ask yourself, wow, is this true? Can this be true? And is this my experience? Because it wasn't my experience at that time. Even though I've been doing lots of work on de-stressing, I still had a lot of negative emotions that I was dealing with. And you can't be in a peaceful, calm state if you still have a lot of emotions, you know, swirling around in your energy system. And most of us have a lot of that. But this was a mind-blowing moment when I truly understood that our natural state is to be absolutely still inside, and absolutely calm, absolutely trusting, absolutely joyful, absolutely peaceful. So you might like to ask yourself, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do I sit on that spectrum? The spectrum being 10 would be that state of absolute peace, constant, ongoing peace, and 1 would be not. You know, where do you sit on that spectrum? And what I learned in that training that year was our job is to return ourselves to that state, because that is our natural state. And if we're not in that state, then there's something that we need to do to return ourselves to it. And again, just like I said before, you know, we don't get rid of stress overnight or in a week or 2 weeks. It just doesn't work like that. And I'll explain a bit more why in a minute. It's the same with returning to this calm, relaxed, natural state. We may have moments of returning to that state. For example, you do a yoga class and you're lying in Shavasana at the end of the class and you just feel so chilled, so peaceful. Or maybe you've had a nice massage and your body goes into the parasympathetic response during the massage. You know, you walk in the door and you're in the stress response, and then you're massaging, and then halfway through the massage, you finally, your body goes into relaxation response and you feel really peaceful. But then you get up and you walk out the door and you're back into stress. So we can experience moments of going into that state, and all those moments add up. But our job is to train ourselves through using self-help techniques, and there's no other way. Nobody can do this for us. Nobody, not anybody. We have to do it ourselves. But we can train ourselves bit by bit, month by month, year by year, to return to this state. And that is our job. That is our job. So there are deeper reasons for why this is our natural state, which I'm not going to go into in this webinar, because it's more, that talks more about, we could say, sort of esoteric spiritual concepts. So I'm just not going to go there today. But what was I going to say? Yeah, the reason that we have this stress response and we keep getting stuck in the stress response, apart from the conditioning and the programming that we had during the first 7 years of our life, and the fact that we're seeped, you know, like a tea bag in a society and a culture, and, you know, everybody around us who is their normal is to be stressed. Apart from that, it's because it's to do with the survival system of the body, of literally staying alive. And our body will do whatever it can to stay alive. It's really important for us to stay alive. So stress is the survival response. It's about safety. It's about security. It's the sympathetic response, which I shorten to SNS, and sometimes I call SOS. And that is the normal physiological response of the body when it perceives danger. And that danger could be real or it could be perceived. But either way, the body is still going to go into the stress response. And that is a physiological response. And from a physiological, biological point of view, the reason the body does this is that if it had to deal with, say, an earthquake and suddenly run outside really, really quickly, every function in the body biologically has to change to allow the body to be able to act really fast. For example, the blood moves from the digestive system out to the limbs so that we can run fast, and the nervous system becomes more acute, and our heart rate increases. So there are these biological changes to manage the threat or the emergency. And then, just like a zebra being chased on the plains of Africa by a lion, if the lion, you know, catches one and then the others aren't in danger anymore, then the zebras will just stop and they will return back to their grazing, and they'll go back into parasympathetic. But for most humans, we're stuck in this sympathetic nervous system response. So we have to learn how to become aware of, well, when am I in stress and when am I not in stress, and what is the difference, and what does it really feel like to be really calm? And And what can I do to keep bringing myself back to my natural state of calm? And if you were to ask yourself, what does it feel like when I'm stressed? I'd just like you to, you might need to close your eyes just to ponder on this, to go inside, because we do really sort of need to close our eyes when we want to go inside and feel inside. But for you, because it will be slightly different for everyone, and there will be common themes for everyone too, I'd like you to close your eyes and tune into what happens inside my body when I go into stress. What happens energetically and physiologically, and where do I feel that? So just take a moment to do that and see what answers come. And one of the things that we often can say for stress and fear, and stress and fear are synonymous, is that there's a constriction. Whereas when we're relaxed, there's a relaxation, right? That's one of the common themes for what people will feel inside their body. They might feel that in a different place in their body, but it is a common theme. And often people will feel it in their gut. And the reason for that is that the gut brain is the survival brain. So it's really important, first of all, any change, the first step in change is awareness. We can't change something we're not aware of. So the first step is we're going to have to become aware of when we're in stress and when we're not. And that's what I had to start doing when I started my journey, was like becoming aware of, well, what changes inside my body energetically and physically when I go into the stress response, or when my body goes into the stress response. Because I need to be able to notice that in order to be aware of it, in order to then make any compensatory changes. In other words, do something to reduce the stress. And then what we need to ask ourselves are, well, what are the consequences of my body going into the stress response? What are the consequences physically, energetically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we could even say? And I have my model of holistic health, which I call my SMEEP model, and I will be putting in the portal. And by the way, for those of you who didn't sign up through the little online program, I will put the link in later when we come to the chat, so that you do get into the online portal. But I have my SMEEP model, which stands for spiritual, mental, emotional, energetic, physical, and that is what a human being is. And we have to address all parts of ourselves in order to address ourselves holistically. But what are what happens when I say consequences? I mean, you know, cause and effect. What happens for you physically? We've already looked at that. When you go into stress, there's going to be a physical response. What happens energetically? Well, energetically, we have these energy pathways inside of us, prana in India, chi in China, and these pathways start getting depleted, and they start getting knotted up and tied up, and our energy in our body, which is like rivers of energy, the flow starts to either get bottlenecked or to dwindle to nothing, and the stream dries up. And then the chi is not flowing properly through the meridian system, and it's not reaching our organs and our cells and our tissues properly. And so our tissues, organs, and cells are not being fed by this energy. And energy is the fundamental building block of everything else in the body. So it affects us energetically, it affects us physically. But what happens to you? What happens to your mind when you go into stress? What is the difference in how your mind works when you're stressed compared to when you're relaxed? Just have a think about that for the moment. what do you notice happening in your mind? And some common things that people will notice when they're stressed is they won't be able to think clearly, their mental clarity will reduce, their creativity will reduce, their problem solving will reduce. And the reason for this is that the blood in the neocortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, is sent to the reptilian part of the brain at the back, the survival brain, because the body is in stress and thinks there's a threat to life. And so until we can reverse that, then we're not going to be able to come up with creative solutions, and everything is going to get distorted as well. And there's in NLP, they say that 80% of what we perceive is either distorted, generalized, or deleted anyway, as it comes into our mind, into our brain. But when we're stressed, we're distracted and things get distorted, and we're not able to make good decisions. We're not able to find creative solutions because the head's just not working properly because we're locked in stress. And we can be in the fight or the flight or the freeze. And really, when we're locked in stress like that with our brain fog and can't think and all that sort of stuff, then that is the freeze response, really. So stress has a huge impact on our mental capacities, and therefore it's very important to de-stress. And emotionally, if we're in stress, we're going to be very likely experiencing also a lot of negative thinking. And there's lots of patterns at work here. Again, can't go into too much detail, but we have these negative mental patterns of thinking and what I call worst case scenario thinking. So worst case scenario thinking is when you're thinking of the worst possible outcome, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it's been one of my favorites, and it's very common for a lot of people. I call it WCST for short, worst case scenario thinking, or AKA pessimism, right? Where we are mentally rehearsing the worst possible outcome. And that is all tied up with stress. And the reason we do this, the reason we have a pattern of worst, WCST, which also is allied to worry. Worry is mentally rehearsing what we don't want to happen. When that is going on, that is the mind trying to protect ourselves. It's the mind's way of trying to protect ourselves and find a solution, but it's not actually really doing a good job. So we have to start to become very aware of our worry habits. And worry will always be about projecting into the future, whether it's 5 minutes time, an hour's time, a day, a year. It's always about projecting into the future with a negative outcome or a pessimistic outcome. And so the mind is really affected. And then we have emotions. We're likely to be feeling emotions such as despair. By the way, worry is not an emotion. Worry is a mental habit. But we might be feeling emotions such as despair, hopelessness, that sort of type of emotion. If we're stressed, and the stress will sort of affect the emotions, and the emotions will affect the stress, and they just sort of go in a loop. So we've got to stop it somewhere. And the way we stop all of this is by learning specific techniques which bring us out of the stress response, back into the parasympathetic response, back into the calm, relaxed, natural state. So the calm, relaxed, natural state, I call CRN. So if I ever say CRN, it means calm, relaxed, and natural. And the reason it's called calm, relaxed, and natural is because our natural state is to be calm and relaxed. And that means the mind is calm and the body is relaxed. Excuse me. So the consequences of being stressed and in fear are not beneficial for us at all. We can't use our mind properly. We're going to have more negative emotions. We're damaging our energy. we're actually damaging our physical body, because it takes a huge toll on the body to be in the stress response on an ongoing basis, which is what most people are doing. And then they're surprised when suddenly they're diagnosed with an illness. Because remember, dis-ease builds up to become disease. So we must do everything that we can to de-stress. And this takes, as I said, it takes commitment, it takes awareness, it takes learning, it takes wanting it. And any change, you know, has to be preceded by the desire for that change. And so the consequences of fear are not good, they're not pleasant, they're not enjoyable, they're not healthy. So what are the benefits of calm? Let's look at the other side of it. Well, when we're calm, we're in our calm, relaxed, natural state. Our body is going to be more in the parasympathetic nervous response, which means our body is going to be functioning more normally and naturally. For example, the digestive system will be working better. Our digestive system is very, very allied with survival. And if we have any survival issues, our digestive system sort of goes on lockdown, excuse the pun, for what's happening at the moment. And then people wonder, well, why have I got food sensitivities, and why have I got digestive issues? Well, there's some sort of stress response going on. So we want to be in the relaxation response, in a calm state for every function of our body, for every system, digestion, reproduction, you know, cardiovascular, everything works better when we're in a calm, relaxed state. And when we're in this calm, relaxed, natural state, our chi starts to flow properly. It unblocks where it's been blocked. It fills up where it's been depleted. It reorganizes itself because it knows how to do that. And all of a sudden, all your streams of energy inside of you are flowing properly. And because chi is the fundamental building block of anything physical in the body, that's going to have a positive effect on the physiology and the biology. When our chi is flowing smoothly, then also our mind will be calm and our emotions will be calmer. And when we're in the calm, relaxed, natural state, we won't have negative emotions. We will be experiencing more what are called the positive virtues, which are things like trust, openness, compassion, love, gratitude, all the good stuff that we always say that we want to experience. So, excuse me. And so we're going to feel better emotionally, we're going to feel better physically, energetically, mentally, we're going to have much better thoughts. When we're in a calm, relaxed, natural state, we'll be having much more positive thoughts, and we'll be more optimistic, and we'll be much more creative. Suddenly ideas will start flowing more. So obviously it's beneficial to get rid of stress. So let me just checking my little notes here. So many notes. Okay, so sorry, just one second here. I'm just gonna, right, yeah. Now, talking about stress and fear and anxiety, I just want to briefly also mention that we have our own personal stress and fear and anxiety, but there's also what is called the collective field of whatever is in the collective field. And when we're in a situation like we are at the moment with a crisis in the world, when people are unable to self-manage their emotional state and their mind and their stress levels, that gets built up energetically in the collective field of humanity. And if we're not aware of that, and we're unconscious of that, and we're unconscious of ourselves, we're going to be automatically tapping into that, because everything is interconnected. You know, on an unseen level, everything is interconnected. And that is going to contribute and exacerbate our own stress levels. So this is even why it's so even more important to be able to manage ourselves, so that we don't get drawn into this collective field of stress and fear and anxiety. And if you think of a tuning fork, if you have two tuning forks next to each other, that they will reverberate, you know, in a similar way after a while. So we have to make sure that we're reverberating at a good vibration, because that is, you know, stress is a vibration, calm is a vibration, they're different vibrations. So again, it comes back to self-awareness of, when am I in stress? Have I just gone into stress? Have I just increased my stress? What it feels like inside. And in that moment, you choose to do something different. You choose to do an exercise which is going to bring you back into the present moment, and bring you back into a less stressed state, and bring you more towards your natural calm state. So I want to introduce another little exercise that is really useful. And before I do it, actually, I'll explain how I came to this exercise, because I already explained my journey of de-stressing and de-anxietying, that's not even a word, which, you know, started in 2006, and it's ongoing. It's like every year I could look back and say, yes, I was a little less anxious and a little less stressed. And now I'm much more able to maintain a sense of calm and peace no matter what is going on outside. But it is an ongoing journey. But last year was an incredibly, we could say, stressful year for me. And the interesting thing is, I can see now that it was a testing ground for me for what is happening right now, so that I can be better able to teach what I'm teaching. But I didn't know that at the time. And what happened was, last year I was experiencing the effects of the previous 3 years. Or 2 or 3 years. And the previous 2 or 3 years had been incredibly financially stressful. And what had happened was that the main therapy that I had been using, the company sort of pulled the plug, and 80% of my income disappeared overnight, and I wasn't really prepared for it. And in our society, money equals survival, right? That's how our society is set up. Money equals survival. If you don't have money, you don't survive, unless you're one of these few people who's living off the land, off the grid, and you're completely self-sufficient. Then money doesn't equal survival. No mortgage, you're just all set up. But not that many people in the Western world anyway are living like that. So money is survival in our culture, and I had a huge shortage of money. And not only that, I didn't really have a lot of support, because no partner, no family in the country, feeling very isolated, insulated, and a lot of fear started coming up. And this was about 3 years ago. And to cut a very long story short, which again, can't digress into it now, but part of the reason that I was being so triggered into fear was because of birth trauma, which was coming up to be healed. And so if we have a traumatic birth, which is, again, it's a whole other story. If we have a traumatic birth, it sets up a limbic imprint in the brain of survival issues. So I'll just drop that in there now, just in case it's relevant for anyone. So I had to go through a whole load of healing to heal that and deal with that. And I was working quite well on that, having, good results. But at the same time, this financial drop in income, frog in my throat, this financial drop in income happened. And it was, in a way, what we call a UDIN, and I'm going to explain what a UDIN is in a minute, because it's really important to understand shock and trauma and stress and fear. But gradually I was going into debt, and I had never ever been in debt in my life. I always paid my credit cards off, always paid my bills, but in my mid-50s I find myself going into debt and not being able to get out of it. So the debt was building and building and building, and I couldn't find other work, and I was keeping going with my work, but still not making, you know, enough income to make a living. And that was increasing my stress, of course. And then last year I just decided, things started to get a little bit better financially, but I decided that I needed to step back from coaching one-to-one, which was my bread and butter up until then, which meant I was living literally on, I don't know what the expression is, but when you're living on nothing. And literally I'd look at my bank account and there'd be $1 in the bank. That was very common. If I looked at my phone, there'd be $1 in the bank. And so I really had to start living and practicing and implementing every de-stress strategy that I'd learned. And obviously I'd learned a lot by then, and I'd already implemented a lot by then. But one of the things that I really had to start ramping up was my levels of trust. Because when we go into fear, it equates to, if you like, like a scientific equation, it equates to a lack of trust. So you might like to think about that for yourself. You know, how much do I trust? And the way I like to think of it is that there are 3 levels of trust. So these 3 levels of trust are trusting ourselves, trusting others, and trusting life in general. You could say life, the universe. So just have a reflection for yourself and just intuitively allow the answers to come. And you might again want to close your eyes. How much do I trust myself? Just allow that number to come. How much do I trust others? And how much do I trust life? And you could sort of substitute in a way the word trust for safety. You know, how much do I feel, well, how much do I trust myself? How much do I feel safe with others and trust them? And how much do I feel safe in the world and trust the world and the universe to take care of me? And so last year I was really, really faced with a real life lesson. You know, you don't get these lessons hypothetically. A real life lesson of, okay, you need to really learn how to trust. And it took every ounce of my effort to work on this. And it was what I was doing mainly for about 9 months last year, was really, really focusing on this. And it transformed quite hugely. And the result of that was that now I feel a level of trust inside of me and a level of peace inside of me that I didn't feel before, and that is there no matter what. And that came from continually having to trust, you know, will I be able to pay my rent this week? Will I be able to buy food this week? Will I be going into the shop and with $10 in my bank account looking at what food am I going to buy? You know, so I really had to work on this. And one of the exercises that I was doing that I found very useful, which I want to share, is what I call my present moment mantra. And again, I will be uploading this in the portal. And as I mentioned before, when we're in fear and when we're worrying, we're in the future. We're not in the now, we're in the future. Or we can go into the past, which is often more sort of like resentment and, I can't think of the other word, but, you know, ruminating and just thinking about the past, maybe some anger. But what we have to do, which is what Eckhart Tolle talks about all the time, is that we need to bring ourselves back to the moment, in the now. And so I use this present moment mantra to do this. And sometimes I would be saying it hundreds of times a day. And it's really simple. So I'd just like you to close your eyes. And as I say this, you can repeat it to yourself. And I recommend that you say it out loud to yourself. Say, I refuse to go into the past. I refuse to go into the future. I choose to stay in the present. I am safe in the now. I'll say that again. I refuse to go into the past. I refuse to go into the future. I choose to stay in the present. I'm safe in the now. And as you say that, notice how you feel and what changes in your body. Because usually something positive will change, will happen, and our fear will be lessened. But the thing with this exercise and this application of bringing ourselves into the present moment is we have to do it repeatedly. It doesn't just, we don't just say that once and then woof, all of a sudden everything is changed forever. That's not how it works. We have to do this repeatedly. And so you might like to try that and see how that works for you. So I want to talk about yudins now. And actually, I would sort of started to talk about it when I was talking about the collective consciousness, but bringing it back to personal. A yudin is an acronym for unexpected, dramatic, isolating, no strategy, shock event. So it's a shock event or an event which is unexpected because it's unexpected, it comes out of the blue. It's dramatic, it's isolating. In other words, we feel like we're isolated and we don't have a strategy initially or in that moment. And an example of a yudin moment would be, say, you're feeling really good. And usually, by the way, these yudin moments come left field. They come completely unexpected. So an example yudin moment would be you're feeling really good and your partner comes home and says, oh, I'm leaving you. That would be a shock, right? Or for me, for example, a couple of years, 5 years ago now, I was talking to my neighbor and they said, oh, by the way, sorry, who's my landlord? And they said, oh, by the way, we need you to move out of the house. And I've been in that house 10 years and they'd always said to me, you'll never have to leave the house. And they said, by the way, you just like, like it was nothing, no big deal. But they just said, you're going to have to move out of the house. And I just stood there shocked, but I was aware that I was having a yudin moment. Now, yudin moments are very important to recognize because when they happen, that shock, that trauma, that fear, because there's a fear that goes with it, gets locked into the cells if we don't clear it. And that can cause a lot of havoc later. And the thing with what's happening in the world right now is that we're actually in a collective yudin. We're in a collective yudin, and that doesn't happen that often. It happened with 9/11. It happened with Lady Di dying, although that was more grief rather than shock and fear. And it's happening right now in a huge way. And so again, so many people are locked into a yudin and fear. And that's why there's the panic buying. If people were not in fear and stuck in stress, and they were more aware, there would not be panic buying because there would be trust. When you have trust, there cannot be fear. They cannot exist together. And this is why we have to cultivate trust as one of the main virtues that we cultivate. And it was interesting because I was talking with a friend yesterday, and she said, we've got supermarkets here in New Zealand. One's called Pack and Save, one's called Countdown, and one's called New World. And they sort of go, Pack and Save is for the low economic socio, class. Class, I don't like that word, but people, low earners, will go to Pack and Save. Sort of middle-ish, maybe Countdown, and more wealthy people might go to New World. It's a bit like the class system in the UK. Anyway, she said she went into Pack and Save and she said there was just people all over the place just panic buying. And she says, I'm not going into Pack and Save anymore, because she said, I went over into Countdown afterwards and it was much more civilized. And this was very interesting to me, because our level of self-awareness dictates our level of ability to manage our mind, our emotions, our stress, and our life in general. And unfortunately, you know, it's true to say that, you know, that some of the people in the Pack and Save have less self-awareness. I don't mean that to sound rude or in any way, but it is true. So we have this collective Yuden, which we're tapping into, and we need to be aware of that so that we're not tapping into it, and we need to be dealing with our own Yuden moments as well. So that's just a little on Yudens. And on the subject actually of these shock, that there are stages of shock. So let's just go through these stages. We have the actual moment when something happens and there's a response in our body. And very often that response is accompanied by us taking a breath in, like that, right? We take a breath in, and the emotion of fear is generated inside the body. And if it's a Yuden and we don't have a solution in that moment, then that fear that is generated will just get locked into the cells. And then there may be some sort of period of denial. And sometimes, by the way, these, you know, there's not an exact order here, but these are some of the different stages. But there may be a denial of, you know, what's really happening. And then there may be a period when we feel really shaky, you know, really unstable. And then there may be a period of when we feel really upset and maybe we're crying. And then there may be a period of when we're feeling really angry. So it's a bit like they say there are these stages of grief when somebody dies. Well, it's the same thing when we have a Yuden. There are stages of shock. And so it's good to recognize, well, what's going on inside of me? And this is why it's quite helpful, even though I'm a great fan of, you know, do as much as you can for yourself. I do recommend flower essences and rescue remedy type flower essences to help with Yudens and shock moments, because they really can help. And the reason they help is that shock is, first of all, registered in the electrical system of the body. And that's where flower essences work. They go straight into the electrical system. Once the shock is registered in the electrical system, it registers in the nervous system, and then it registers in the cells and the tissues and the organs of the body. So if we can take a rescue remedy flower essence of some sort, that can really help to recalibrate the electrical system, which then helps the nervous system, which then helps the rest of the body. And another thing that I want to add, which is really, I wouldn't normally talk about in a stress webinar, but it's because of what's happening at the moment in the world, and because it's so dramatic, what's happening in the world, is what I see happening with humanity is really what normally we only deal with on a personal level, but now we're dealing with it in a collective way. And we're being brought to a halt, right? You know, our way of life as we know it has been brought to a halt just about worldwide. I mean, I know there are some countries, for example, Africa, that are not affected so much, but Europe and Americas and even South America, you know, hugely impacted, and life has been brought to a halt. And the interesting thing about this bringing things to a halt, a standstill, is that this is what happens when people get sick. For example, they have chronic fatigue or some other chronic illness. At some point their life will be brought to a halt. And the reason this happens on a personal level is because, as we say in Ren Shui Qigong, is that we've been breaking the laws of health, and we've been breaking the laws of nature, and we've been going against the natural laws of health and nature. And that is what has caused the disease. And so life brings us to a halt so that we can take stock, because there are two things that need to happen. One, we need to, well, three actually, we need to understand what has happened and why things have come to a halt. Secondly, we need to learn something about ourselves. We need to understand something about ourselves that we didn't understand before. We need to see something we didn't see before. And the third thing is we need to change something. Now, if you think about what's happening in the world today, this is exactly the same, because it's the law, one of the laws of the universe is macrocosm, microcosm. So a human is a microcosm of the macrocosm, which is the more bigger, world at large. So humanity collectively is 8 billion people, and that is the macrocosm. And humanity has been brought to a halt because it needs to learn something collectively, and it needs to change something collectively. And I'm sure you already know that anyway. But life is making this happen. Life is making this happen for our own good. And we can either resist what is happening and think something's gone wrong, or we can see the bigger picture and the bigger reason for this happening. And initially, for example, when people get sick, they will resist it. They won't want it. They want to get rid of it. They want to get rid of it without asking why or understanding why it's there. And that's never going to work. And they're just going to miss the whole lesson. And then something else will happen, down the line if they use some sort of intervention to deal with the illness, such as medication or surgery. So just as on a personal level, there's a reason for getting sick. And we're meant to be stopped in our tracks so that we can learn and change. So it is with the collective right now. And goodness knows what that is going to be, because, wow, what an experiment to have to do that on a collective level. It's hard enough doing it by yourself, just one person. But collectively, that's a lot of change that's going to happen. But until we get those lessons and we make that change, life will keep bringing us the lessons. That happens individually and it happens collectively. So we are, as Buckminster Fuller says, in the final exam. And the thing that we have to remember here is that we can be in a state of trust over this. We can trust that actually there's a bigger picture, there's a bigger reason for things going on. And as we cultivate trust and learn how to do that, we will be in a state of trust, and we will not be in a state of fear, or we can be in a state of fear. And the choice is ours, and the choice comes through awareness. So you can contemplate on what I've just shared and whether that means anything for you, whether that's relevant for you and helpful. And the other thing to mention about fear is to really recognize that, because when we go into fear and then the mind sort of is thinking all the negative thoughts, or it's shutting down and it's going into brain fog, the anxiety, the overwhelm, all that sort of stuff, we have to really recognize what is the fear really about. And fundamentally, it's about fear of survival, right? Fear of staying alive or not staying alive. And it's also very much to do with fear of isolation, which is very interesting, because having now, most people being put in self-isolation, that's really going to be challenging for a lot of people, because they're so used to being busy, being out and about and doing things and keeping themselves busy. So it's going to be quite challenging for a lot of people. And I'm going to be doing a separate Facebook Live on how to deal with isolation. But if we can actually recognize what it's about, then it takes some of the fear away already, right? And then we also need to learn how to process our fear and all emotions, which is what people learn in the Emotional Alchemy Academy. But one of the tricks to processing any emotion is to acknowledge it. So here's the thing, and I'll just do, because I'm going to do a couple more exercises in a minute, is thoughts are rational and emotions are irrational, and thought and emotions can't be thought away. I'll just say that again. Thoughts are rational, emotions are irrational, and emotions can't be thought away. But of course, that's what most people are trying to do. And then of course, it's not working. The thing that emotions want the most is to be recognized. So if you think to a time when you felt upset, something happened and you felt upset. Just allow whatever that memory is to come into your mind. And if you think about, say you were talking to somebody and you were feeling really upset, what was it that you really wanted in that moment? Did you want them to tell you what to do? Did you want them to tell you what they thought you should do, or what their thoughts were about the situation? Or did you just want to be acknowledged without judgment, just totally 100% acknowledged? Probably you wanted to be acknowledged first. Maybe we wanted some advice too, but we just want to be recognized and acknowledged for who we are, and that's because this is all tied up with what are called human needs. So what we have to learn to do as we become more self-sufficient over managing our mind and our emotions is that we have to learn to acknowledge our own feelings. So rather than staying stuck in them and unconsciously resisting them, and what we resist persists, we have to acknowledge what we're feeling and welcome it, embrace it. So one of the things that you can start practicing is that when you feel any emotion, whether it's sadness or upset or hurt or fear, is that you stop what you're doing and you close your eyes and you put your attention on that feeling and you notice where it is physically in your body and you just welcome it and you embrace it. And start doing that instead of trying to, have it disappear by just continuing with what you're doing, because that's not going to work. What we resist persists. And if we try and distract ourselves by keeping busy whilst all the emotions are churning around inside of us, that doesn't help. They stay there. We have to stop and actively do something with them. So the last thing that I want to share is just going to read a little something, which is from our Qigong training. And again, I will put a link to this in the portal and you can download it. And there's a little audio mini guided meditation, you could say. But I'm going to share what it is called the heart prayer. And so I'm just going to guide you through this. So again, coming back to sitting comfortably, or maybe you might be lying down, and gently close your eyes and take 3 long deep breaths from your abdomen. Breathing deeply, breathing up the spine into your shoulders as you breathe in. Exhaling, letting everything go on the exhale. And put your hands on your heart and feel your heart. As you breathe in your abdomen, you feel your heart. And then connect in with a sense of trust, whatever that is for you. Feel what it feels like to feel trust. And connect in with a sense of love. And a sense of what it means to be open and trusting. And a sense of gratitude, what you're grateful for. And true respect. Connect in with these positive virtues with utmost sincerity. And send your mind out into the void of the universe and unify with everything that is out in the universe. Make yourself one with the universe. And make yourself one with all forms of life. And make yourself one with the human family. Feel your connection to every single person on the planet. Feel connected from your heart to their heart. And share the following best wishes with everyone in the world and the whole world. Say inside you, may everyone go into their heart to find refuge and feel safe. May everyone go into their heart to feel trust, openness, love, gratitude, and true respect. May everyone go into their heart to see beautiful, bright light. May everyone go into their heart to meet their true self. From deep in your heart, wish everyone health, happiness, and positive growth. From deep in your heart, wish the world peace and harmony. Open your arms to the universe and unify with the unconditional love and wisdom of the universe, and draw it back to your heart. Feel that unconditional love and wisdom of the universe in your heart. Feel the peace and the harmony inside. And then take a couple of deep breaths and open your eyes.